of the Municipal Solid Waste and Resource Recovery Advisory Council. I'd like to welcome everyone, say Happy New Year. Got a new 2019, ready to move forward. And so we will start as tradition and go around the table up here and introduce ourselves, and then if you would, acknowledge who you represent. And then once we go around this table, we'll ask the microphone to go out through the audience where you can identify yourself and who you represent. So we'll start on my left. Kevin?
Kevin More-Knowledge. I'm with Liberty Tire. I represent the scrap tire industry.
Jeff Mayfield, North Texas Municipal Water District. I represent a public solid waste district or authority.
Commissioner Wolverton, Guadalupe County, representing counties under 130,000 population.
Maurice Pitts, County Commissioner in Lee County, and I represent counties of any size.
Cheryl Murga with the Houston-Galveston Area Council, and I represent a planning region.
Richard McHale with the City of Austin. I represent city and county solid waste agencies.
Dave Yankee with New Gen Strategy Solutions, represent the financial community.
I'm Holly Holder with Park Hill Smith & Cooper in Lubbock, Texas, and I represent licensed professional engineers working in the solid waste industry.
I'm Chuck Rivette with Waste Management, and I represent a professional with experience managing a commercial landfill.
Heather Douglas, representing a private environmental conservation organization, NTCRA, from Dallas.
Good afternoon, Scott Trebus. I work with Republic Services, and I represent a solid waste management organization composed of commercial operations.
I'm Trent Perez, council member for City of Pearland, representing cities under 100,000.
Good afternoon, Earl Lott, Director of Waste Permits Division, TCQ.
Good afternoon, Jaspinder Singh, MSW Permit Section.
Diane Barnes, MSW Permit Section.
Chance Gooden, MSW Permit Section.
Risa? We got...
I'm sorry, I'm Risa Weinberger, and I'm representing composters.
Gene Muller, Section Manager with the Waste Permits Division.
Charlie Fritz, Special Assistant in the Waste Permits Division.
David Greer in the Pollution Prevention and Education Section, TCQ.
Barbara Coombs, Environmental Benchmarking.
Hello, I'm Steve Shannon, representing the State of Texas Alliance for Recycling.
Ken May, CapCog.
Steve Minnick, also with Republic Services.
Brian Christian, Governmental Affairs Consulting.
Larry Lane, Texas Disposal Systems.
Laura Gary, GDS Associates.
Jack Simmons, GDS Associates.
Anne Marie Callery, Registration and Reporting Section.
Haya Zeman, Director of Permitting and Registration Support Division, TCEQ.
Scott Schneeberger, representing myself.
Well, thank you. Well, I follow Twitter, and about 2 hours ago, I got a Twitter feed with none other than Earl Lott on there. Earl, you and Chance have had a rather busy morning, I guess, presenting Solid Waste 101, and so I will give you the floor, sir.
Thank you, Holly. That's right. That's one of the items I was going to update y'all on this morning. Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. First Miserac meeting of 2019. As Holly was saying, the agency has gotten a lot more proactive about we've got a Facebook page now and a Twitter page as well as Instagram, and there are live feeds on just about everything that agency is doing of interest now. It's part of our public outreach and letting the public know what's going on. So if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, if you do any of that stuff, you can find out up to the minute what's going on with the agency. So we're even putting these meetings on there now, advertising them a little bit. So kind of along that same theme, we started legislative session on January 8th, and we had a pretty busy interim session as well. And there was a lot of interim hearings on the Senate and the House side. And the Senate report has come out. It was published, and I think y'all may have received a copy of it. I think we sent it to y'all on December 6th or something to that effect. And there were a few recommendations that came out on that report, and we're going to be looking at it as an agency to, see how we're going to implement some of those recommendations. One of the biggest items that came out was there's been a lot of interest in floodplain requirements and locating of municipal solid waste facilities in floodplains, and our process for doing that. We follow the FEMA process. We work with the local floodplain administrator as well as FEMA. And we go through the CLOMER process where the local floodplain administrator as well as FEMA signs off on the improvements on how you're going to protect the facility from flood inundation. And then the second phase to that process is obtaining the LOMR, which is a letter of map revision. That's after the facility is built out and constructed and you've actually removed it from the floodplain. You have to work with FEMA on getting a letter of map revision. So that just changes the floodplain altogether. It removes the facility out of that floodplain. One of the comments that was made in that report is that the TCQ doesn't really follow up on that LOMR process. And maybe that's something that I would pose to this group to, is there how that's handled if you have facilities or parts of facilities that were located in the area where you obtained a CLOMR. The question is, do we ever follow up to see if the LOMR was obtained? Because the thought is it's not completely removed until you have that letter of map revision showing that that facility is no longer in the 100-year floodplain. So, yes, a letter of proof or something to that effect. And then one of the things Chance and I have been talking about is we were considering adding a provision to our permits possibly on situations where portions of the facility are located in the floodplain and you've obtained a CLOMR, just adding a provision that says once these structures have been installed and are constructed, then you will provide proof of the LOMR.
I know enough about this to be dangerous, I guess. And, like if you're in a municipality, and generally those cities, because of flood insurance requirements, they have someone on staff that is their floodplain manager. So if you are constructing a building or any type of facility in that municipality, or even a county, a lot of counties have that also, then they do look at that site to see what are the impacts, to the floodway, flood zone. And you have to go through those processes and submit those plans to them for approval, which are then forwarded on to FEMA. And they have their process where they give you that conditional letter of map revision, meaning that if you build it as you've designed it and we approved it, then once it's constructed, we will revise our maps and give you that letter of map revision. And so I think that's where the difference is, because some of these sites, that landfill sites may be outside of an area that has that floodplain manager for either the county or the city, then maybe that's where that is kind of falling off the map a little bit. I don't know what you guys could do, except for the fact that if part of your landfill permit is contingent upon improving a floodway, let's say, then before that facility opens, I would say they would have to have that letter of map revision if that part of that construction was contingent on that floodplain improvement being made. And that could be one of several things. That could be improving the channel where the flow is better. It could be a detention system, any number of factors. But there might be a way that you tie that back in when you're going to open that facility, Earl, that they have to prove that documentation, because they're not going to build it until they have the permit, obviously. But once they have the permit and they go into construction, then they would be charged to build those stormwater improvements that are tied to that facility.
Well, the only issue with these, with the LOMR process is, it could be on the far end of the landfill, an area where you're not going to construct for the next 30 years. So to require it up front, is an added expense to the owner operator up front.
Well, that's
Whereas-
that's where they could stage that. If that is something that's not required until the landfill is in the 20th year, then maybe that goes back into someone following those construction steps. I know when we build a new facility, usually there's someone from the region comes out with permit book in hand, and they go through there and make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and that the facility is built in accordance with the plan. That's where that LOMR, if it's required for that initial phase, they would say, where's your letter of map revision for this? And if you don't have it, you can't open. But if it's a facility that is 20 years down the road, then that's when that trigger would happen. They couldn't build that until that LOMR was obtained, at that point in time.
Earl, I just say, on the surface, it's a simple enough thing. If you want us to submit our LOMRs, we'll start submitting our LOMRs. There's hundreds of things that we get permission and approvals from. Our scales are approved by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We have all kinds of transportation permits from TxDOT. We have county permits for this, that, and the other thing. We got sewer connects. We can make a list of about 100 different things. I know this is an important one, and so we can put it on the list and say it's important. There was a time when it was very important for us to turn in as-built landfill gas construction, and I don't know that's as important anymore. If it punches a bullet and makes certain people in non-flood prone areas of the state where this has become an important issue, then we can. Holly's right in that in certain jurisdictions, the flood control authorities are extremely sophisticated, and that process is very rigorous. There are other jurisdictions, especially jurisdictions where flooding is not as big of an issue, right? But floodplain is still an issue. And the farm map that you use is an insurance map, right? So I've had the instance in a small county where we've gone and we said, we need to get a letter of map revision. We've completed the structure, and they've said, do you have any buildings? And we say no, and they say, well, there's no need to change the firm because there's no buildings, and the whole purpose of the firm is to insure buildings. And we literally were put in a situation where we had to go build a building so that then we could say we had a building and we were going to self-insure it, and could we have a firm? And that's the only issue I have with saying you have to submit this to me. I mean, it's easy. We'll submit it to you. But somewhere along the line in the 254 counties, you're going to run into some weird stuff.
Right.
All right? And what seems like a simple request, someone's going to have a really hard time meeting that request, and not for any reason of their own.
And let me back up what Chuck's saying. So the floodplain map, which is what derives whether you're not in the floodplain, is they're based on gross statistics off of a gross survey. So they're highly inaccurate, but they're good tools, at least to derive what if you're doing a development where you do have buildings. It's a good tool to force you to look at the hydraulics of it. I think what's important is that there is. If there's a drainage analysis done that shows that you have an impact to the floodplain, that the drainage analysis is approved by an appropriate party to say there's no impact to the floodplain. The LOMAR is simply so they don't pay any insurance. And when we do LOMARs for development, it's to pull buildings away from the floodplain so that the insurance can go down. It's not practical. It's not a practical document that states there will be no flooding on this property. And the other component is, if you're talking about a 20-year plan or a 30-year takedown on some of the landfills, those maps will change 3 or 4 times over that time. The effective map will be updated and modified, and the floodplain could be pulled back because of channel improvements up or downstream. The floodplain could be come back into the site because of a lack of maintenance to the effective stream. So it's kind of a flash shot. I don't know if it's as beneficial. I don't know if that requiring the LOMAR to be filed, if the local permitting or the local floodplain manager doesn't need it, and it's not going to affect their NFIP. I don't think it's really all that necessary as a part of the permit process for the landfill. I do think it's more important that there's an improved drainage analysis, and if that is not already part of the permitting process, then that should be.
Yeah, that's a big tricky issue, Trent, in that the way the rules are written currently, the firm map is in fact the de facto acceptable delineation, although the applicant has the opportunity to do a detailed study if for some reason they believe the firm map is not accurate or could have issues. But absent a detailed study, you're not required to do a detailed study. Flood study. You have to do a detailed on-site drainage study, but not a flood, because the issue gets in when you're saying the flood study, that's just not the landfill. Now you got to go how far downstream and how far upstream. And you may not have access to that data. You know, you can apply to FEMA, and sometimes they'll give it to you. And sometimes they'll say, why do you want it? We don't want you to have it.
Again, you know, just treating it as if it was just a normal development project, it would be, you do the drainage analysis, you determine what the drainage impacts are and what the mitigation procedures are. If in that analysis you show, I have no impact to the floodplain, you don't do a floodplain impact analysis.
There you go.
And you can do it by making a delineation in the site plan or in the landfill plan saying, we will not cross this barrier because that barrier is floodplain. And it's clear in the permit, it's like you cannot cross that barrier without doing a floodplain analysis. If you do cross that barrier, typically, you know, for something like this, you're not adding, you may not be adding a whole lot of fill in the floodplain that requires the mitigation. And that's the big deal. Are you taking volume fill away from the floodplain? And where that volume fill goes, the analogy I use all the time is if you have a cup of water and you drop a rock in there, the water moves up. In the floodplain, it moves out. So it comes off of my property, goes into yours. If I drop that rock, which would be in this place, in this case, dirt, when I put it onto my property, it moves onto yours. That's why it's important that I mitigate it by having an equal amount of cut on my property, so that when that water moves, it moves onto my property and not yours.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. If the landfill development encroaches upon the delineated floodplain as shown in the firm map, then under no circumstances do you get by without doing a detailed flood analysis, okay? But
yeah,
a lot of times the landfill may be many acres more than the landfill itself for buffer reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so there'll be a corner of the property where the floodplain exists, but you don't have anything going on. And in those are the cases that I'm saying that the firm map becomes a de facto representation, and you don't have to do a detailed analysis to show I'm not doing anything to an area that I'm not doing anything to.
And I think we're saying kind of the same thing from different approaches, because I would say if you get to the point where you're saying I'm going to have this impact into the floodplain, and I couple that to my drainage analysis of here's how I'm going to mitigate that floodplain, the LOMAR is just following up paperwork, and it's mostly for insurance purposes. It's not for the engineering purpose. It's good to have it on file, and it could, if you care about the insurance, but if they don't, if the landowner doesn't care about their insurance rates, which if they don't have any structures in there, there's nothing to insure, because there's nothing that they would take a claim against. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a necessary component. What is necessary is the drainage analysis, if it has an impact to the floodplain, that is a document that's approved, maybe even reviewed by the local floodplain manager to make sure that they agree with it. Because in the end, they'd be the one that suffer because it's their NFIP, their National Floodplain Map, their CRS rating. It's that which would be affected, and they would be the ones who would be caused damage if it affects their CRS rating. There's any development done that does not manage the floodplain appropriately. But the LOMAR is not important. If we're doing the drainage analysis and the drainage analysis automatically triggers the floodplain analysis if the floodplain's impacted, I think that more than covers it.
You know, and that works, except that not every county in Texas has a floodplain manager, and a lot of small cities, a lot of small counties don't have that, unfortunately. But, you know, I got to thinking too, we have our storm drainage team, you know, they carry a certification called a CFM, Certified Floodplain Manager.
Right.
And it just dawned on me that maybe that somebody on your staff, you ought to get at least a couple of those that are trained up on that. There's some, I think it's 20 hours a year. Do you know, Trent, are you CFM?
It's funny you mentioned that. Holly, we just had a training by a certified floodplain manager a few weeks, or right before the holidays. Did a full day's training with us, and it was pretty outstanding training. And we have a few staff that are interested in pursuing that certification. So that recommendation was actually brought up during the hearing. Does TCEQ need certified floodplain managers on staff to look at these things? And then to address your issue about areas in the state where there's not you're absolutely right. Like in West Texas, certain areas, these counties don't even have floodplain managers because it never floods there.
No, it does, but well, they just don't have anybody that follows it.
They just haven't, yeah. But, you know, in those cases where an application is submitted, we still require you to provide some sort of a study to demonstrate that you're not being impacted by flood inundation.
And that's a part of the permit application. You know,
right.
And that document is usually what you would also submit to FEMA that's the same level of information that you would end up submitting to FEMA if you were trying to apply for that.
Well, what if it was just a letter from, so the counties and the cities that don't have floodplain managers it's probably because they don't have an MIP program. They're not worried about their community rating. So it's not pertinent to them. There's nobody who can be damaged because there's no CRS to manage. If it was instead of a LOMAR, a letter from the local floodplain administrator that has jurisdiction over the land where the landfill is, stating a letter and said, we have no objection. Or if there's a lack of a certified floodplain manager or a community floodplain manager, then just some, maybe the county judge is assigned, city council or the mayor or they're assigned that writes a letter and says, we have no objection. And that way it at least checks the box that there's no, I think what we're trying to do is, what are we doing to ensure that the box is checked? And if it's the floodplain manager, the local community that should be most worried about this, if they say we don't have any objection, then I think, in my opinion, the box is checked.
So I think we're going to see a few bills this session related to floodplain issues with waste facilities, and you know, any input will be welcome. So
so that's really what's driving this. Was I guess there was someone's permit where it said you need to obtain a clomer or a lomer.
Well, that's the standard process we've followed for years. We've said, you know, if part of your facility is located within the 100-year floodplain, and we use the FEMA map as the prima facie evidence. So if you submit that FEMA map and part of your facility shows in or near that floodplain, then we require you to coordinate with the local floodplain administrator, if one exists, and FEMA to get a clomer. And that was our process. And once that clomer is obtained, we would continue down the permitting process. But, you know, it's not our part of our process to go back and verify that the lomer was obtained at the end of the process. So there's been a lot of discussion about the need for the lomer. I understand what you're saying, that drainage is sufficient and these other things. So, but we're getting a lot of feedback on that issue, and I suspect it's going to continue during session.
I would just respond, the LOMAR is only pertinent to the landowner for them to reduce their insurance.
Right.
It is not necessary to prove that you have no flood impact. It's just a document that's filed and accepted by FEMA to say we've, in finger quotes, revised the map, which is just a letter that says, hey, this map's revised, but they don't reissue the map.
Yeah, they may or may not actually revise the map.
Well, and they
itself.
usually don't
Yeah,
for 30 years.
Depending on the community,
But it
like in West Texas, they're not going to affect that. Those effective maps will stay for a generation. In Houston, they change every probably 4 or 5 years. But the LOMAR is really, the actual LOMAR, the letter is only pertinent to the landowner for insurance purposes. If they have no structures to insure, they have nothing to file a claim against, the LOMAR is not important. Following through and saying, hey, did you get this LOMAR? Because we want to make sure that you did everything. That's not the process. I think the better tool is the local community stating, we've reviewed this and they have no impact to the floodplain. And since it's our floodplain in our community and we're okay with it, that should be more than sufficient. And that would all couple with the drainage analysis and everybody who looks at it and makes sure that those things are true.
That's in the event that they have a program to do that.
If they don't, then there's nothing to protect.
Well,
we
if you have a clomer that you're building to, then whatever you're building is part of the site development plan of the
Correct.
permit. And it's no different than any other road or any other cell or any other item that you said you're gonna build. That documentation that you built it according to the site development plan becomes part of the site record, right?
Correct.
Why would this be any different, I guess?
Well, the point they're making in the report is that the LOMR is telling the person that actually approves what has been constructed out there has indeed been constructed as suggested in the CLUMR. CLUMR is saying, here's what we'll do to take this area out of the floodplain and prevent washout of these waste units.
So maybe we don't.
Regardless of a structure being out there, we're looking at it from a standpoint from swells, berms, dikes, things that protect the waste unit.
I understand.
Aside of the insurance piece.
So skipping the LOMR process itself, maybe what you need is you just need the developer, the landfill owner, to send you the as-built drawing for whatever the CLOMR structures are.
Well, I think we have, sure, yeah.
I'll say the same thing. It's just an as-built. You're just having a paperwork that said that you have an as-built.
They're not sent to you now, okay?
No.
But they're on file. They're part of the site record.
The things that you
as-bills are.
submit to say, here's what we did per the CLUMR to get that letter. Yeah.
Well, and there's another
It's
side to that.
all on site
Well,
record.
to me, the letter, the LOMR indicates that those things were done.
And I was just going to add another layer to that. I mean, all of us up here that have PE after our names, we are charged with protecting the public health and safety. And one of those things, as a licensed engineer, you're going to go back and look at what was the requirement in that CLOMR and make sure before you put your seal on that drawing that you meet the requirements of that CLOMR, or we're in violation. So,
Good
love
point.
talking drainage.
So it's just the first point of the.
Moving on, I don't want to digress too much here. A couple of other points that were made in that interim report, Senate interim report, was regarding our notice of deficiency process. There's been a lot of feedback with the program on our notice of deficiency process and how we continue going back and forth with applicants, and we never say enough is enough and actually stop the process, stop the bleeding, and return the application. Well, one of the things I explained is that landfill permits are unique from any other permit this agency issues in the fact that they're issued for the life of the facility. All other permits in this agency are 5 or 10-year terms. So when we review that permit, we want to make darn sure it is right, it is environmentally protective, and we're comfortable with everything we're recommending. So, one of the things that we've also noticed is the way we communicate with applicants is anytime we can't find information in that voluminous application, we will send out a notice of deficiency. Well, you may be missing a page number off of the application, or you may not have the right USGS certified map that you submitted with the application. Now, in the big scheme of things, it's not really a technical deficiency, but it's something we want to correct, especially if these are contested applications. So the way we do the process now, we write you a letter and say, hey, could you please provide the page number on page 49 of this application? Also provide the correct map, and you're missing some drawings here and there. The recommendation that came out in the report was to separate the non-technical deficiencies from the technical, the true technical deficiencies, because, you know, I think when we've done an analysis of it, there's a significant number of items that are non-technical in nature. It's just oversights and omissions. And we've developed the forms and checklists to try to reduce those significantly. So I think Chance has already implemented a new process of separating those technical items versus non-technical. That's already happening, isn't it?
Yes, we're actually, we don't have a document that actually says this rule citation will be technical in nature, this one will be non-technical in nature. It really goes back to the reason why we need it. If it was flat out omitted, or what you did supply the information, but the sentence was a run-on sentence and it doesn't make sense. It gets into some weeds there, and so we review I review every NOD, and I call it when I see it. Is this truly considered a technical NOD item, or is this going to be a non-technical? It could be about technical information, but what's the reason why we're actually noticing that? And that is going to be a work in process. We're establishing it as we go down through the electronic checklist as we see it. Hopefully in a year's time, we'll have a set of data to say, well, this is what we've determined that's non-technical and technical, and run the numbers and say, these rule citations are coming up more as a non-technical, these are technical, but yet to figure out, you know, what that might be. It's a work in process.
Okay, moving on. One of the other things in the report was a declining fund balance of Fund 549. As y'all know, Fund 549 is the fund that actually funds our program, that all of the agency municipal solid waste functions, including investigations, the enforcement process, you name it, are all funded out of Fund 549. And that fund has a declining fund balance. And I think at some point in the near future, about 10 years, it's going to have it will basically zero out. We wouldn't have enough funds to operate the program. So there was a recommendation to reallocate that fund split. Right now, it's 66% of the tipping fees goes to Fund 549 to fund the agency programs, and 33% goes to Fund 5000. And I think the recommendation was to adjust that split once again. And then lastly, there was a recommendation that look at allocating additional resources to the agency municipal solid waste programs and see which areas it would be most appropriate for, like for additional resources in Office of Compliance and Enforcement, or even permitting. So we're doing that evaluation as well.
Yeah, I would just say from my experience, there's any more resources that can be put into the enforcement, on the enforcement end, would be helpful. I know you guys are stretched pretty thin, just with the one issue that I deal with on a regular basis. So I would certainly encourage that there be more funding to that, and give you all an opportunity to hire more staff and not spread y'all so thin.
Okay. And then I know we're tracking a number of legislative bills right now. Charlie, y'all met Charlie Fritz, my assistant. She's going to give us a brief rundown on the legislative process.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie. I'm special assistant in the division, and I've been coordinating the bills.
It should be green.
We can hear you, I think.
Okay. Talk loud. Yes, she did.
Charlie, did you tap it or push it? You gotta tap it.
Tapping.
Or you can have my seat.
So I'm the coordinator. We've been doing a number of sessions started on Tuesday, but bill filing has been going on since November.
Most bills we have received so far have been refiles, meaning they've been submitted previous sessions and just haven't gone anywhere. There's only been a couple of just new filing bills. So most of what waste permits have seen are mostly refiles. There's only been one so far that is truly kind of focused on solid waste, and that is HB 523 from Allen. All the rest have kind of been more agency focused, either on agency rules, contested case hearings and affected parties, or on air, water, and waste applications. We've seen a couple so far. HB 245, which is about applications being posted online. And we've seen Senate Bill 180 from Miles on low-income and minority environmental justice reports. But again, these have been more agency-wide permitting, not just focusing on MSW applications. And the one I mentioned just a second ago, HB 523, is about permit applications for solid waste facilities and kind of a new process of soliciting comments about these facilities before the application is submitted. So those are kind of the ones we've been tracking so far. There's been a pesticide bill. There's been a bunch of hurricane preparedness bills that have a slight impact to the division, more to the agency itself. But the ones I just mentioned by number are the ones that have kind of had a focus on the division itself. But we expect, it's still early, bill filing lasts until March 8th. And this is kind of the usual process we see, that most of what we get right now is refiles. Things slow down a little bit, and then there'll be a bunch right before late February, March is when it gets really busy.
Charlie, could you give a little more detail on Representative Allen's? You said they want comments before submittal?
It's new language adding into the health and safety code on an application before it, so when an application comes in, I'd have to go check if it's a new expansion, all that, but when an application comes in, the applicant is required to solicit comments from, or a questionnaire, or it was actually in the bill, it's a questionnaire from residents within a certain distance of the landfill. And also, so residents and certain groups, I'd have to go look at the exact bill language, but yes, nonprofits, but it's, so it's asking for similar to public comments, but getting these comments in when the application is submitted. And again, that's HB 523.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
How many of those bills that y'all have seen deal with the enforcement side?
Specifically for none so far. And again, how we kind of analyze bills, we can get you that information, or we can figure out, we can talk afterwards on specifics. The division itself hasn't seen many enforcement-related solid waste. That doesn't mean the enforcement division itself hasn't tracked any bills. So we can talk with them afterwards and get you that information later.
I think, again, a particular concern of our region is on the enforcement side and increasing the punitive measures for when the notice of violations lead to a notice of enforcement. So far, the financial punitive measures are so meek, it's not really, I mean, for a company, a large waste management company to get a fine for an egregious issue that's under $20,000, that's not really going to affect them. It's not pushing them or motivating them to try and solve the issue. So I'm not sure. I know I've heard that there will be bills filed, but I don't know if there's anything associated with the air permitting or the stormwater permitting, or if it's the overall permitting process for the MSWs that have been filed that address that. If there haven't, then I think I need to talk to some people and make sure that they're due. But if there has, I'd love to hear what's being suggested.
Okay. We'll check with the enforcement division to see what's been filed so far, and it just may be that it hasn't been filed yet.
want me to go?
You done, Earl?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Chance, it's yours.
Thank you. MSW update. So you have your our org chart in there. Staffing update. You'll see that there's a vacancy in every area of the section, and it says there's 3 there, but we actually have 4. We have another one. So all areas of the section have a vacancy. So we are in the process of hiring and hope to get those staff back in-house to continue reviewing what we receive. And what we receive, we currently have 31 major applications in-house. That's, those are the major ones. We actually, do 200, 250 a year, but the major ones that take a great deal of effort, we have about 31 of those.
Chance, I did a quick comparison. Tamara and Mark left from your last. Did they transfer inside the agency? I'm curious, or did they take private?
Mark went to the Railroad Commission,
Railroad
and Tamara went to Radioactive Division, which is with our agency.
Okay, so they're still in-house. They're just
no Railroad Commission, not ours.
Oh, that's true. That's true. My bad.
So,
my bad.
but we also lost Mary DePrisco under Team 2. Her last day was Friday, and she went private. So she's a private consultant.
And you have a new person, Kristen?
Kristen is a new staff member. She wasn't able to attend today due to training.
Okay.
So she has already hit the floor running. We've already assigned her a registration. So we're very happy to have her. So like I said, we're wrapping up. Every time someone leaves, we send the approval over to HR to say, add this one to the mix. So we don't have to repost. So we're thankful in that regard that we don't have to repost, just add another name to the approval list. But that's the way it goes. Turnover.
So David, if Ben is looking for a job, tell him to come and apply.
Chance, there may be a few thousand EPA workers looking for a paying job.
Tomorrow, yeah, tomorrow they decide if they get paid or not. So, that said, so we're moving things as always. I think one of the good things that I'd like to tout a little bit is the feedback we're getting on the checklist. I've had emails being sent to me how much they like it, and I appreciate that and the feedback we're getting on that. And I'm hopeful by this time next year we'll see the fruits of that and have some percentages of how well that we've processed our applications in a consistent manner, and everybody is playing on the same level of playing field. I do want to bring attention that the Federal Register over the holidays, actually December 26th, proposed rule revisions on municipal solid waste landfills addressing liquid management. If everybody saw that, but they did ask for comments to be back by March 26th of this year, and just kind of briefly highlighting what they're proposing to do is they're seeking some information on removing prohibitions of bulking liquids at municipal solid waste landfills, and also about defining a class of a MSW unit. An example of that would be bioreactor landfill units to operate at an increased moisture content. So if you're interested in providing comments on that rule, it has been proposed and can be found in the Federal Register. I didn't write down the actual number.
You said comments were due back?
March 26th. It is, it's specifically, the title is Revisions to the Criteria for Municipal Solid Waste Landfills to Address Advances in Liquid Management. So it has to do with, bioreactor landfills. I guess they're looking at what landfill units becoming a little bit more wet to decompose faster. TV recyclers, we always talk about recycling in pretty much every one of the council meetings. The date to submit your annual report form And registration form is end of this month, January 31st. And we have seen, as you know, a decrease in the number of TV recyclers in the last couple of years. And we're expecting about 9 facilities to report this year, which is down from 12 in 2016. Lastly, trade fair. I think we're going to meet one more time before trade fair, but I just thought I'd give you just a little preview of what we're planning to present at this year tract, and it's actually scheduled for May 14th and 15th, and MSW is going to be presenting on the first day, which is the 14th. And right now we have slated on our tract landfill mining closure and post-closure requirements, and then we're going to have a couple of sessions on MSW 101. We have 2 sessions on that, and then lastly we'll have tires. And that is all I have for my update. If there's any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Holly, let me add one thing. Chance has been a little, it didn't give himself enough credit, you know, even with the high rate of turnover and whatnot he experiences. And, you know, this program is very controversial. Almost every application we get requires a public meeting, and there's a significant number of public comments. Well, for fiscal year 2018, Chance and them processed 92% of their applications within the time frames. And that's a 1-year time frame that we have for these applications. And, you know, implementing that checklist and some of these other streamlining tools, he and his management team have done a really good job of training staff. They're getting up to speed a lot quicker. And if any of y'all are doing business with this program right now, let me tell you, they will harass you to get your responses in for notice of deficiency. So you don't see regulators calling you many times and say, hey, get your application in, give me this. You know, so they stay on top of it, but it's paid off, and they're done a phenomenal job. So
No, it's noticed outside, Earl, and we do appreciate the efforts that Chance has put into this. I mean, he came into the program, you know, and now he's really got his hands on the reins and is doing a great job moving it. So.
Well, I've said it many times, there's opportunity and challenge. So.
Any questions for Chance?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. A lot of the positions, 'cause a couple people come to mind that I know of, and Ben is gainfully employed, so sorry, but thank you, Earl.
If y'all don't know Ben, that's his son.
Yeah.
And we had him as an intern a couple of summers ago.
Yeah.
And the guy was phenomenal. He was an engineering student, and he started doing what our advanced level engineers were doing. We're like, oh boy. So I think he takes after his mother in that aspect, though.
Probably.
Rim shot.
All right, losing my train of thought. But I'm looking, a lot of the folks are PEs or geology. Do you have positions that would be non-professional engineer? What type? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the 4 that we're actually hiring for do not have a license certification associated with them. Doesn't mean that they would been reclassified. They could be an EIT grad. So there's potential where they could qualify to go out and get their PE. And the state, thankfully, can help with that if they so choose to. And we have a very hard time posting something that has a license associated to it with the entry-level pay that we have. But a lot of times what we find is we grow them up and they leave us.
If they have more of a planning background than engineering, is that not what you really need, though? You want
No,
more?
we do. We have some spots where we would do a program specialist type issue. Not very many, but
right.
You know, it just depends on how that interview goes.
Okay.
What they bring to the table.
Sure. Thank you.
Anything else for Chance? Earl, Chance, we really appreciate, you know, I know you've had a busy day, a hectic day, and probably a lot of work preparing for your morning sessions, so appreciate y'all able to really make the meeting this afternoon and keep us updated. So we'll move along now to our next item. Is Gene Muller, manager of the Business and Program Services section of the Waste Permits Division, going to talk about a subject we talk about on and off, scrap tires. So,
Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon, Gene.
My name's Gene Mueller, the newest section manager to join Waste Permits Division. Definitely appreciate having this opportunity to come here and meet with y'all. I saw that I think your last meeting was October 11th, so I just kind of looked at what happened from your last meeting to now as an update. So I have 3 things to talk about here briefly as updates go, and that's going to go into new staff, which includes myself. I didn't show up after October, but I've been here almost a year now with this section. But also a update on EPA and a discussion about tires and the non-hazardous secondary material rule. So I'll give you all an update on that. And then the last one will be the upcoming annual scrap tire annual summaries that are going to be due on March 1st. So getting into that, the first item is just talking about new staff. So there's myself. I joined in January of last year, so coming up on my 1-year mark. Been here at the agency for 18 years in various offices and divisions. As the scrap tire program goes, I am happy to announce that we have a newest addition where we created a work leader position in the scrap tire program. So we had Megan Henson join us on November 1st. So the management structure now in the scrap tire program with the TCQ is there's myself in the business and program services as section manager. We have Santos Olivares as the team leader. And what we've done is now inserted also a work leader, which is Megan Henson. And then we have a full-time scrap tire person, Emily Bell, who I believe I heard gave a good presentation here at the last meeting. So she's our one full-time, and then we have 4 additional staff that help off and on. They're doing things like permit administrative reviews, but they're also helping with the scrap tire program. One thing that I'm hoping with the addition of this work leader, the scrap tire program has been keeping Santos and myself busy, and we're hoping with this work leader addition that it'll give us a chance to take a closer look at our website, at our forms, and identify if there's some improvements we can make. So we're working on that, but really looking forward to having this work leader and the structure we have. So that's some new stuff that's going on in the scrap tire program. The next item, I believe, was mentioned at the last meeting, that the meeting was October 11th, and we were going to have pretty much a Halloween meeting with EPA up in Dallas. So this has to do with the scrap tires in relation to the non-hazardous secondary material rule. What was occurring with that is we have approximately 14.4 million tires in unauthorized tire pile sites across the state. A lot of them were generated when there was some funding to, when we had the funded scrap tire program, and there was funding to process the tires, but there was an ultimate disposal, so we kind of generated our own problem there. But out of those 14.4 million tires, back in December 2017, we were able to get a letter from EPA that helped us address 10 million of those in regards to the non-hazardous secondary material rule. So let me jump to that rule real quick then, just in case y'all aren't aware. But with that rule, it identifies what non-hazardous secondary materials are or are not solid waste when burned in combustion units as a fuel or as an ingredient. So what we were coming across was that if these tires were considered discarded, that was something where they would just be considered solid waste. And that creates some challenges for facilities that want to utilize that as tire-derived fuel. Because what happens is, under Clean Air Act Section 112, you're able to utilize this tire-derived fuel, but what happens is if you call it a solid waste and it doesn't get to enjoy that relief from being a solid waste, then you pull in Clean Air Act Section 129, and what that does is cause these facilities, such as cement kilns, to be considered to be having a commercial industrial solid waste incineration unit, and those are much more stringent air regulations. So that's kind of the background on that non-hazardous secondary material rule. So with those 14.4 million tires, we had the 10 million that Earl and everyone did a great job. The division did a great job, I think, on getting that clarification from EPA. But we still had these 4.4 million tires, and what was happening with those is that EPA allowed the 10 million to be considered part of an established tire collection program, and therefore they are not solid waste when burned in combustion units. These 4.4, though, EPA couldn't come into agreement with us where those were not discarded. So they were definitely saying those are discarded tires, and that kept it in the solid waste realm. The clarification we're expecting from EPA here shortly, if, I think there was the Twitter feed, my latest 1 hour news feed about an hour ago said that the government shutdown is still ongoing, and I think you mentioned some EPA staff might be looking for jobs at TCQ. But we're hoping, I guess, once that government shutdown maybe picks back up, but we were expecting something pretty quickly from EPA that was going to clarify and allow those 4.4 million tires where if they are minimally processed, there's a way that if you process a non-hazardous secondary material, if you process it, then it can come back into not being a solid waste when burned in, when used in an incineration unit or when burned in a combustion unit as fuel or as an ingredient. So what we're hoping for, what we're expecting is something that's going to clarify that in writing. And what that will help is it'll give an additional opportunity, an additional avenue to manage these discarded tires, whereas they could have, we can always take them to landfills, we can use them for beneficial use, but they weren't able to be used in cement kilns. So this will be specific to allowing these tires to be used at cement kilns as tire-derived fuel. And that's where we're waiting to hear from EPA. I'll jump into the third item, and that is just to deal with that upcoming annual summary. So March 1st is approaching quickly, but that's the due date where transporters, scrap tire storage facilities, and scrap tire facilities have to submit their annual summaries. So that's due March 1st. Tomorrow, we're planning on sending about 517 letters out as a reminder that that date is coming. So March 1st will come. We'll start, hopefully we'll get all the reports in by March 1st, but typically what happens is it trickles in a little bit even after March 1st. But we expect to compile that information and create our 2018 scrap tire annual summary sometime by mid to late April, at least our first draft version. You all may have seen the 2017 version. The previous annual summaries are available on our website. But just kind of letting you all know that that is coming up, that March 1st deadline. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
I got a quick one. Gene, thank you for the update. So I'm looking at the 2017 scrap tire annual report we looked at last time we met. It said there were 43.7 million tires that were managed in that reporting period, and 13.5 million were used as tire-derived fuel. Is the 10 million that you got a letter on in the EPA, will that be now in addition to the 13.5 million, or does the 13.5 million include some of those 10 million? It'll be addition.
There's tires that can't qualify now as tire-derived.
Okay,
Yes.
so this report would have, Kevin, this would have basically been 13.5 million tires that were collected from NTW and all those places and that you supplied.
Outside the state.
Okay, all right.
He's referring to the piles of tires that are not historic.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's all I was trying to seek a clarification, but then my next question is there enough TDF demand to absorb? I mean, we're already burning 13.5 million tires just in the normal course. Is there enough demand for another 10 million tires? Okay, well, I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, that is something that we're hearing, that there's some potential things that could be occurring that
Good.
could up the,
Fantastic.
where people are looking for some additional tire-derived fuel. But yeah, that was 31% of that, I think 43.7 million was used as tire-derived fuel.
And then the 14.4 million tires that are in the discard piles, and I don't have this report, but Earl, just my memory is 2 years ago, plus or minus, we had a report and there was 25 million tires in stockpiles. Is that number going down, or?
It is. So, Gene, you want to give them an update on that? The numbers that we have overall in these piles?
Yeah,
It's the 14 million now.
Yeah, that is the
Yeah.
14.4, and there's some things, it's interesting, there's actually some things that are occurring potentially where there's some new ownership changes with some of the bigger piles. So we have, for the piles that fall in that 10 million category, where they were part of an established tire collection program, I think the largest is almost 5 million. I think it's like 4.8 million tires.
That's the Midland.
Yes, that's the Midland Odessa site. And then, we have the next one, which is Vista International at about 3 million tires. And then, so those are the big ones. The next one is a Gatesville site. That one's currently actually being cleaned up. So hopefully at some point that number will come off that total. And yeah, the safe tire, and that was mentioned, I think, at the last, meeting, that was 2 million tires that got cleaned up. So that's why.
It seemed like for years and years and years, we made no progress on any of them, and that's a lot of movement in a couple of years.
Who paid for those
Chance loves
cleanups,
this.
Gene? Just curious, who paid for like the San
Take
Antonio
exception
side?
with
How was
that.
that? How was that paid for?
That was where they made an agreement with the county, kind of on back taxes, and so it allowed the adjacent property owner found that piece of property to be valuable, and through agreements and getting an open line of communication going, they were able to work out that, hey, us as this business owner next door that wants this land, will pay to get it cleaned up. With some tax benefits or property tax benefits, things like that. So definitely, something that's worth looking at for future sites.
So how did those tires get used? Do you know what they were used for? Because they couldn't be used as a fuel.
Yeah, well, those ones, so that was part of an established tire collection program. So they did evaluate if those could be used as a fuel. But what you get into is transportation costs. So, as a good business decision on their part, they had to weigh, they had a landfill that wasn't too far away. So they priced out, okay, how much is it for us to transport these, take them to a landfill, pay for disposal, versus transporting these and having them used as tire-derived fuel. And what became, I guess, due to distance, what made the most cost business sense to them was to go ahead and take them to the nearby landfill. So those ones were disposed.
Gene, you mentioned those other tires that weren't in an established program, those 4.4 million, could be processed and then remove that designation of solid waste. What exactly would process look like? Are we chopping them up, or somebody out there
Yeah,
doing something
and
else?
that's a great question, because that's the clarification that we're getting from EPA. What was initially being described was EPA is really holding on metal removal from the tires as being the thing that makes a tire processed. We went into discussions about the sorting, the grading, the cleaning of the tires. There was all these things that if you take a tire out, you have to process it, but they just weren't on board. The attorneys at EPA in Washington, D.C. Couldn't see eye to eye on that. So what happened, though, is there was this idea of tire or wire removal or metal removal, but what was indicated initially was something like 90% metal removal. And in cement kilns, the metal is actually a benefit to create this clinker when they put these tires into these big cement kilns. So they have no real specific reason to want to remove any metal. Plus, you have additional processing now involved with that. But what this ended up landing on was the processing is still metal removal, but it's kind of minimal processing. So it's a slow grind is what's being described, so just kind of a basic shredding process with some amount of metal removal. The number that was thrown out there right now was a minimum of 2%. We'll see if that's what comes back or if it's going to be kind of process driven. But it's gone all the way down from 90 to 2%. And industry, as in we had input from Portland Cement Association, and they seemed to think that was going to help these cement kilns to utilize it. So those tires would still need to be shredded is what would get them with a minimal amount of metal removal. And that's what would get it back into this not solid waste.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gene. We really appreciate your work. Okay, next on our list is Ms. Barbara Combs with Environmental Benchmarking out of Dallas. Welcome.
Thank you.
And going to speak to us today on demand-side management and applying that into landfill management. I think you've got a PowerPoint here, don't you?
I do. Where's the? Okay. Okay. I do want to clarify, and thank you so much for setting this time aside. Okay. If we can kind of just step back from our day-to-day work and think about another industry that has dealt with demand-side management in the 70s, but they were responding to a crisis, the oil embargo in 1972. And when that happened, there were several laws that passed to create more security in our country to handle that kind of behavior from OPEC to shut us off from oil supplies. And what they've done since 1978, when I'm sorry, at the bottom of my presentation, there were some bills that passed in 1975. There was the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, and then that was followed by a national energy conservation policy. And those policies, yeah, okay, so the clicker, if I want to go, okay. Nope. Point it? I'm pointing. Am I pointing in the wrong direction? Oh, thank you. So these policies were able to create a motivation to implement demand-side management practices. And what demand-side management means pretty much is it refers to initiatives and technologies that encourage consumers to reduce or optimize their energy use. Some of the ways that were able to use demand-side management in the electric utility industry was issuing rebates, refinancing for photovoltaics or for appliances or windows, insulation, and other ways. Load leveling is managing the distribution of energy. It could be bulk storage of energy in batteries from photovoltaics. And then today we're getting towards smart technology, which your appliances are able to respond to the utility and say, okay, I won't run the dryer during the day, I'll run it at night. So this has had a terrific impact since 1978. And I'd like to share with you that I was a recycling broker in 1988, 10 years after this, but the first recycling programs were really in place, at least with Weyerhaeuser Paper Company, in 1978 when they started buying pre-consumer, printers and distribution warehouse material. So some of the benefits from implementing demand-side management include the deferring of capital cost for construction of utilities, lower cost to the consumers, and more effective distribution of power. This is just according to a CEE report. In 2016, Canada and the United States were able to avoid construction of 17 power plants. They were able to reduce the CO2 greenhouse gases by 26 million tons. So, again, I am not trying to say I know how to transfer these practices, but I just thought I'd like us to look at some of the issues before we don't want to respond to a disaster. We want to just look at our industry and see what's going on that is kind of like saying we're a red flag going on. Our region has some of the lowest garbage fees in the United States, but and to divert material, you sometimes, at least if you were to look at the West Coast, the higher fees mean a higher diversion rate. So, but that is actually changing right now. I mean, the city I worked out of in San Jose, and I have been in Texas for 10 years. So whenever I refer to California, please take the okay. Right now, California used to be at 64 diversion. That is dropping fast. So Texas has a big window right now. Not that we want to take advantage of their problem, but we've got a lot of good infrastructure. We've got a lot of reasons to really knock the ball out of the park on recycling and diversion. So back to some of the problems. Texas is one of the fastest growing states, 430,000 people a year. That converts to 500,000 tons a year, which is taking about additional year off of the landfill life. If nobody moved to Texas, we'd lose a year. 430 people move every year. We're dropping another year. So it's about 2 years of lifetime. Does that make sense? Is changing on our landfills an average. Right now, the average is 54 years. This is a terrific publication. I did in that information of the averages from that. And hurricanes can have a major impact on landfills. There's some cities that are just disproportionately, their ability to manage waste in proportion to their generation of waste. Dallas is 30, but their capacity is 21. Houston, you can see the differences there. I want to do a call out to San Antonio. They are steady as you go. They're an 8% total waste and 8% landfill capacity. They're doing a great job there. So conserving Texas landfills. These are just some ideas of what is going on if you look outside of the landfill. And I need to really emphasize that please not look outside. Look in your landfill to see what needs to be diverted. What we're doing so much in looking outside of the landfill by counting our recyclables is really taking our eye off the ball, which is looking at what's in the landfill and the material that's going into it. So mattress recycling. There are two large mattress recyclers, and by that I describe them. They do not destroy the mattress. They take the foam out, they take the covers off, and they maintain the springs and the frame, and they can do 500 mattresses a day. Now, if you recycle every mattress in the hotels, 70,000 hotel rooms in Dallas, you're only doing 800 a month. So they can keep up with this volume, and they send trucks as far as Houston and out to Alabama, but they're very quiet in their, you wouldn't know about them. I mean, USA Mattress is just, they don't have a website, they don't have business cards, but they're a legitimate large company. They just work with liquidators. They prefer not to work with the hotels. They just work with liquidators and who deal with the hotels. So I'm trying to get them to let people know that, and I'm working with, there's a gentleman out of San Antonio that I've talked to about working on what their problem is, though, is they don't, on mattress recycling, they want to pick up large quantities, and so there's still a lot of mattresses out there. If you took the 1.2 million people that live in Dallas and we recycled all of their mattresses, we could save an acre of land a year out of Macom's landfill. Expanded polystyrene. There's over 12 cities that have banned EPS, and we have some very large facilities, especially in Waxahachie, that make styrofoam. They're not cooperating with receiving and recycling styrofoam, but if 30% of your material, according to one document, I'd like to look into that more, is styrofoam in your landfills. What are we doing to try and find ways to recycle it? I know the industry wants to support us on that because the option is that we would follow the way of New York and the other 11 cities. Waste oil recycling. This was a new one. I got a phone call from a broker out of Eagle Ford, and they have a facility down there that is recycling the waste product from fracking, and it's solids and liquids. And the unique thing about the facility is that they, the customer's no longer liable once it goes through that process. If it goes to the landfill, they still have a cradle-to-grave liability on their material. If they put it through this thing, they're not liable. But this particular facility is shut down, and the Railroad Commission has shut it down. And I'm wondering if there's a way that, you know, that discussions can create, because there's got to be thousands of gallons of liquid material going to some landfill that could be going to this facility if we can get it back up and running. I don't know exactly the details of what it would take. But that's what I'm saying about looking if you keep looking at what's just counting the recyclables, it doesn't keep you focused on industrial food processing. Cisco is headquartered here in Texas, and they have quite a bit of, I at least know one facility that has 7,000 pounds of tomatoes a week going to actually the water treatment plant. But they have solids that are going to the landfill when that could all be composted. Mini mills. I'm hearing the economies of scale aren't really going to work these days, but in the night, not that long ago, there's a mini mill in Hialeah, Florida, and it can take all of your paper from your cities, and they only take like 2 square blocks, and they make toilet paper. So they're like an urban forest. You can't smell it. It's just it's a mini mill. There's some interest from African countries to start doing those, though, because I'd love to see more research done on whether or not these are viable today. I haven't seen many of them built, but they were built 10, 15 years ago. And then commercial digesters. These are machines that can take food waste at a shopping center and turn them into soil amendments. I'm just trying to think of what can we do to help that industry grow, what the model for a landfill is very different from the model for the utilities. The utilities do generate power ongoing. So you've got, you don't have an end of life. You build a 2,000 acre landfill and you got an end of life that you can identify. So it's not the same. I realized that after I put this together and thought I'm not sure but our industry needs to evolve to make it easier. Hearing him stand here and say, "Oh, we had to send it to the landfill on the tires." I've got a guy, Fort Bliss, wants to recycle 500 mattresses a day. I don't know if we need rebates or what to help with transportation, but to send those to the landfill, 500 mattresses a day, not a day, a month. Rather than send them, bring them into Dallas, create more jobs. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I know that we've got options that we're not using, and it's up to us as an advisory council to figure out what those answers are. And I'm just I want to keep the dialogue going. I really, really appreciate that you let me come here and talk. I just know that if we're going toward a circular economy, what is it going to look like? It's one of the first times I've used that word. It's not something I use regularly, but it's, everything does have a value eventually, which again is why I really discourage you from trying to count your recyclables. Let's count garbage per capita. It's easier. It's already tracked in this document. It's more fun. You're going to get a lot more diversion or movement of reducing your landfill by counting garbage per capita. I can say Dallas is at 7.7 pounds per person, while Austin's at 6. That's going to fire up, or Oklahoma is actually doing a little bit better on garbage per capita per day than, they have a lower garbage than Texas. Well, shoot fire. That's one of the biggest things that'll get people excited about recycling or reducing. And recycling's in third place. I don't know why we keep looking at that. What we want to do is reduce. We can do that with a lot of programs. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. No, that's fine. I would open the floor for any questions. Barbara, thank you so much for your presentation. And
I'll just tell you, I appreciate your passion for it. Having dealt with recycling and diversion and landfills for the last 20-plus years, big driver is economics. So some of these things you're talking about, don't disagree with you, but cost-wise, that's the hurdle. Some of these things that you're touching on are already being done in limited areas, commercial food waste that's being taken for composting or what have you. Some big operations in the Houston area that are doing that. There is mattress recycling occurring in certain parts, around the state. We just had one of them speaking here to our session.
I'm going to work with him because he wants to dismantle it.
Right.
That's actually what the mattress industry wants. They want you to destroy the mattress, get it off the market. And if that happens, when you have to buy a new mattress and it's $600 versus the ones where they're refurbished, and they tag them with tags that say this is refurbished material. They're sold to Salvation Army, they're sold to shelters, and they're like $200 a piece. So we don't want those businesses to go out of business.
Right.
But the utility industry, what blew me away is they mothballed a nuclear power plant in the early 90s. Dave Freeman was running the SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. How'd they do that?
Well,
I mean, I know you're saying finances drive it, but something happened in this industry to change and shift things, and we got to figure that out. I would like to have that figured out.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, there are things occurring, but it's going to be driven by the dollar and the economics. Right now, with some of the challenges in China, just keeping current clients with their recycling programs is an issue that we work with clients on. So I appreciate where
Then they
you're
need to
coming
be more
from.
vertically integrated, so
But
they're
who's
not
gonna
selling
pay for it? Someone
to
has
vertically integrate and get more diversified. So you.
At the end of the day, though, someone has to pay for this. So I agree with you. I'm passionate for it, but it has to get paid somewhere, and that's the big challenge here.
Okay.
So
Well, is there a value to that sell that if it's $14 a ton to construction and operational costs, that we can say, okay, if I can finance it and get, 10% interest on that money, and it's paying me more than dumping it in the hole, maybe there's a model. You're the finance guy on this committee,
let
so
me
I am
give you
going
an
to
example.
work with.
Let me give you an example that happened this week
Okay.
with a nameless client city in the DFW area. Tipping fee to put it in a hole, $19 a ton. Processing at a MRF, and we're keeping collection costs out, $50 a ton.
Wow.
So,
Okay,
and
you're
they're
keeping it
keeping their
out.
recycling program, they're keeping it, but it costs them more to recycle. The citizens are doing it because they want to do that, it's the right thing, and so we're helping them with that, but it costs more.
I know, and I addressed when they were passing the apartment recycling bill, I addressed the city council saying, at $22 a ton, you don't mandate. You do that when you're at like 80% recycling. And you need to raise your tipping fee, and they did create, Heather will back me up, they created a panel, she's like, what? But they created a panel that discussed raising the tipping fee. I don't know where they are in that process at this point, but I would sure like to see that happen in Dallas. But it's kind of a two-edged sword because waste management perspective, if you get paid more to throw it, if we raise the tipping fee, how am I incentivizing you to market for recycling? I mean, I've motivated the end user, but it's just,
Well, I'll just remind you, we're the largest recycler in North America, and we look at recycling very much as a business, and we make smart decisions, and we try to recycle as absolutely much as we can and where it makes sense. We're not biased one way or the other necessarily.
and I apologize if that came out sideways, but I just I did work for Weyerhaeuser in 1988 and helped teach actually the haulers on how to recycle. And at one point I said, Weyerhaeuser, are we getting in the hauling business? Because we're not, and they're not here anymore. So it's if we'd been doing this since 1978 when recycling first came out, we wouldn't have this China problem. All industries would be more vertically integrated. They'd be not sent into the landfill. They'd be sent into mattress recyclers and, whatever. They'd be doing that. So China wouldn't have happened. And we're in the crisis now. Oh, well. So I hope we can keep talking. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's always good to start the conversation, and so we will take that and appreciate your time and coming up here to speak to us today. Thank you. Next item on the agenda in your packet is the October 11th, 2018 meeting minutes. If you want to take a minute to just look through there, and then we'll call for a motion for approval.
Chair,
Yes.
after you do it, I'll make a motion that we move to approve it as presented.
Second.
Motion to approve. Are there any comments?
Holly, I got a couple corrections.
With corrections.
Miss Sarah Nichols, I believe there's no H at the end of her name there.
Oh, yeah.
And the last one, Alfonso Cifuentes, I think that should be SIF. And it's Green Group Holdings, not Screen Group.
Yeah.
With that, I'll move to approve them with the corrections made.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other comments? Not all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Approved. Action items. Any, Diane? No action items that you're aware of? Okay. One thing I guess I was curious about, I got a site and I was going to kind of throw out and ask if anybody has any guidance or direction. It's regarding auto fluff and disposal of. If you've got a site that's not approved in their landfill permit, but I guess the health and safety codes trumps all the regulations. Is that the way I understand it? Chance?
The statutes are first, and the rules implement the statutes. But yeah, they're in concert together. A rule cannot trump a statute. We have to follow the statute first. And where the statute's silent, we support with rules.
Okay, so in the rules, and then the permit follows underneath the rules, right?
Yes.
That the order of
specifics
hierarchy.
Yes, yeah.
So if it's in the permit and it's not allowed, and it's not
Permit
really-
can't conduct, permit nor can a rule contradict a statute.
Right, so the statutes trump all,
Yes, sir.
basically. Okay. And then the other thing is, I guess, the landfill itself can refuse to accept that waste without any kind of
Correct.
regulatory penalty or anything.
Correct. It wouldn't be under the purview of us.
Is there something that would tighten all that up at some point? Would have to be a rule change, or?
According to the statute, it says that the agency could promulgate some rules to indicate how to manage that. The agency has not done that at this point.
Okay.
No.
That would be in Chapter 335 if that was the case.
That just helps me on
Sure.
private side. I don't know if anyone else has have that.
I'll just throw in here, auto fluff is a long-standing potential issue in the landfills. Not all auto fluff is the same. Auto fluff is residue, auto shredder residue. So when they dismantle cars, they shred the parts that they are not able to directly recycle. So think of like your dashboards and things like that. And depending on the equipment, the age of the auto shredder device, what kind of screening they have, you can get very low amounts of shredded metal, or you can get large amounts of shredded metal into the auto shredder residue. It's just not the same. Depending on the plant, there's some of them that have extraordinarily long histories with the EPA where they fail T-clip tests on a routine and regular basis. And there have been some allegations, I can't verify or otherwise, that certain facilities, when they have T-clip failures, they just take more tests until they get enough passing that they can statistically think. The reality of it is that in the
What is that? What is that test?
toxicity characteristics,
Leaching
leaching
potential.
So it's basically you soak the metals in a weak acid base, and the amount of metals that come out of solution or go into solution will either make the waste class 2 non-hazardous, class 1 non-hazardous, or hazardous. And but the bigger issue, and again, this is not consistent. There are some facilities that have taken auto shredder residue for decades and not had any problems. There are other facilities that have taken auto shredder residue and later, presumably because of the chemical reaction of the very fine metal with the amino acids in the liquids that come from the leachate, you can get a sustained chemical reaction subsurface that you're not really sure what to do with when that happens.
Okay.
Right? It's heat, bad heat. And so often, and my company has auto shredder residue on a long list of special waste that we accept on a case-by-case basis with approval of very senior management only, after they've reviewed the source, done testing, various and sundry other things, so for whatever that's worth.
Well,
Okay?
that helps. I appreciate that. So,
Some of the data on this auto fluff, and it has very high levels of TPH. Is what, like upwards of 30,000 parts per million.
Well, that's very disturbing.
Well, and I understand it comes from the grinding of the rear ends on the vehicles. You know, it has the heavy oils if they're not drained or whatnot.
Which
they're just ground up.
Which is very disturbing.
So.
Yeah.
well, that's my fear is that, they're going to be pushed into accepting this waste for other reasons outside of the regulatory framework. There's other factors out there that affect particularly municipal sites that create challenges. Well, I appreciate the input on that. Thank you very much. And if no one else has anything, I guess we will be closing this meeting and looking forward to our next meeting, April the 11th, 2019. We'll hopefully back to 10 a.m.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Well, are they going to be able to stop them from taking it? Well, why don't they petition us?
I got one.
tell him to send a petition and we will respond that we've researched the statute.
Yeah.